Yeah, I know what you want me to talk about, but I'll get to that in a moment, because there were other people in this race, you know. One of them particularly outshining the ordinary Carlos Sainz. And that's not me calling Carlos ordinary, it's the Italian commentators calling him ordinary, whereas Charles Leclerc is il predestinato, the predestined. Of all the weekends to go on holiday, this was one of the worst for me, because Charles Leclerc goes ahead and wins Monza for a second time, all the while the rest of the F1 world burnt around him. After a very long stint of Charles Leclerc getting so-so results and having a really bad triple header, he's now been able to come back, along with Ferrari, with a car that is able to beat Red Bull quite convincingly. Max Verstappen was closer to Fernando Alonso than he was to Charles. And like I said in my predictions video, even if Ferrari doesn't beat McLaren in the Constructors, although McLaren is making it a little bit easier for them at the moment, if they can still beat Red Bull in the Constructors, regardless of what the position is, that will still be a very sweet victory. Everything seemed to work for Leclerc this time out, especially capitalising on getting past the McLaren on the first lap, which nobody expected as recently as that new turn 1 at Monza. And you know what? This was yet another example of Ferrari having a good strategy. They were able to pull off that one-stop strategy. I think only Albon and Magnussen and Sainz were the other drivers in the top 10 that were able to make that strategy work to some effect, whereas Charles was able to hold his own quite nicely. He didn't crack under pressure, the team didn't crack under pressure. In fact, there was a really funny moment, I think, in the press conference that Charles Leclerc saw Binotto, his face dropped, whereas he was celebrating with the Tifosi, his new race engineer comes along and Charles is like, hey, it's this guy! And that was quite wholesome as well. I think Charles really needed it, and most importantly, Charles was able to lay down the gauntlet to Lewis Hamilton in the best possible manner. Not only do you beat him at Monza, you win Monza for the second time, out of adversity, not expected, and then the reception you get, it's fantastic. Lewis is struggling in qualifying, he's lamenting his woes, and then Charles comes in and does that. Il predestinato. That is a really good way of saying to Lewis, welcome to the team. I still lead it, by the way. So, my friend, don't be sad that the European leg of F1 has finished and now we're going to have to set our alarm clocks again, but be happy that it was Charles that capped things off instead of a Max Verstappen domination train. And even though I think that the team boss of Williams isn't doing a good job, I think his drivers are, because another one of those to make good on the one-stopper was Alex Albon. Only he and Kevin were able to make that plan work outside of the Scuderia and scored points. Now that's more than made up for them losing out on points in Zandvoort. 8th place on the grid back then, that looked like they were probably maybe even going to get 8th or 7th place or something like that, but it wasn't meant to be. But here though, at Monza, they'll take it. And considering that all of their rivals didn't score, I mean, okay, Haas scored 1, but they were able to score more than Haas, this is a really good weekend for them, and now maybe they're not going to be locked into 9th place anymore. Sure, Alex couldn't really do much with his front tyres to get any higher than 9th place on the day, and there was a huge gap to Checo in 8th, and I bet Red Bull were relieved about that, but considering that Alpine scored no points, okay, that's not so bad. So hey, maybe the Williams upgrades are coming good after all, now that they're legal. And we might be able to see some kind of competition down at the bottom end of the midfield and around the back markers, because Sauber ain't doing anything. And then we've got to actually talk about Franco Colapinto. It's interesting to note that Franco isn't fully media trained yet, as he basically just said on his Twitter, when pulling out of his pit box during practice, he just goes, looks cool from the outside, done it, mate, effectively. He's got that rawness, which I wasn't really familiar with. And also, that rawness is probably all over his lower back and muscles at the moment, because he's probably suffering hard. He needs a really good long shower and a massage, because I think he said that the longest stint he did in the FW46 prior to this weekend was about 8 laps or something. This, though, was 53. In the middle of a heat wave. Yeah, that was really rough, and he was able to bring the car home back in 12th place, so that is pretty respectable. And he was over 10 seconds ahead of Daniel Ricciardo as well. And he also seemed to handle the tyres a little better than his teammate did, reporting less graining on the front left. And had he started a little bit higher up the grid instead of exiting in Q1, he might have had a shout at either finishing ahead of Alonso or even snatching 10th from Magnussen. That is a respectable start, Franco, so good job. Even though it might not lead to a permanent seat in Formula 1 in the future, this is certainly a really good beginning, dare I say, statement. That's already becoming a little bit tired, isn't it? Either way, you gotta rest up, because Master James, he really needs you to score points. And that's it for the winners, really, because we've got a whole lot of meh coming along, and McLaren is here, and here it comes, what you all were expecting. You'd think I would send the team to the dark bit for their antics this weekend, but you know what? I just can't be bothered. This whole situation of McLaren fumbling and letting go a potential win has become so regular at this point, I'm just desensitized to it. It's just like, okay, whatever. Sure, I'm still a McLaren fan, there's no doubt about that, but we're getting into the situation where McLaren should be cakewalking the constructors at this point, and sure, they're within 8 points of Red Bull for the top spot, and no other team at the moment is mounting a charge, although that could easily change, but they're just leaving points on the table, they're leaving wins on the table, and this whole not giving team orders is getting really, really weird at this point, to the point where Will Buxton, when he's talking to Zach Brown, and Zach's going, well, we have 2 #1 drivers at our team, and then Will's just going, okay. Yeah, he was caught on camera rolling his eyes. There's plenty of video. Go and look, there's proof. But when you get into that point where Will Buxton is doing that he's bored of this hyperbole, and he's the king of hyperbole, you know something's wrong. Okay, so where do I stand with this? You'd think I would be just all about my boy here, but you know what? I think Oscar did complicate things a little bit, but ultimately it's down to the team to respond, and they didn't really respond. But you gotta admit, that overtake into the second chicane was remarkable, and Lando was caught napping, simple as, but it was a clean pass, and if Lando had decided to brake later than he had, and he claimed that if he had done he would have crashed, Oscar did have room to abort the turn and go around the escape road, and possibly feed back behind his teammate, or maybe he might have lost to Leclerc. It's hard to say. That didn't happen, and both cars got around the corner, and they were sticking to supposedly papaya rules. Do you really need a code word for that, though? It's pretty obvious. Although they could be seemingly pulling away from that papaya rule mindset after the media tore into them, Andrea Stella being a little bit more open to the idea. This is the fiercest that the British media have been toward them so far. But the thing is, though, is that Oscar is showing us that if he is allowed to race and team orders are not brought in, he will race, and he's not afraid to overtake his teammate to do it. And also, this really brings up a good question. Isn't this the kind of behaviour that we were expecting from Lando? To be ruthless, to ignore your teammate, to ignore your team, to better your own standing and better your own result because you're here to win? Yeah, I know Oscar is even further behind Max Verstappen. He was faster and he overtook Lando in a clean overtake. Sure, it was ballsy, it was audacious, but neither driver collided, there was no damage. So does this mean that Oscar showing championship credentials is not okay, but if Lando does it, then it is okay? Just take some time to think about that, okay? Because we want Lando to be ruthless, we want him to go after the championship, but he's not doing it in the way that we were expecting, but Oscar is. Both of them squabbling with one another, who was going to be finishing ahead, that really didn't help matters. So on the track, yeah, they were at fault to some extent. And as a result, the call was made to bring them in for another stop, so they couldn't do a one-stop, and ultimately, they couldn't reel in Charles Leclerc at the time to get ahead of him before the race finished. This was yet another gaffe from McLaren, so in terms of handling the strategy and handling the overall race, the team were to blame. Lando and Oscar racing each other and squabbling for who was going to be ahead, them losing rubber, and then they couldn't do a one-stop, that was on them. So the entire operation is to blame here, but I couldn't put them in the losers section for the fact that they do have the best car. They locked out the front row. Lando got back-to-back poles, the first time that's been done since Lewis Hamilton was there over a decade ago. So they did have some good points throughout the weekend, but the fact is though, they had a 1-2 in the bag, but Lando couldn't keep Charles behind, and Oscar couldn't catch Charles as well. So it was just made complicated by Oscar, sure, but the team didn't find a way to respond and give Lando the place. That means he didn't have to use his rubber, and he could respond to Charles. Also, this is very important to note, is that Lando says he doesn't want to be that guy who's demanding team orders over the radio, even though he has shown that he can be a little bit passive-aggressive on the radio when the team's asking him to do team orders and stuff, like in Qatar last year, in Hungary, that became a Mardy. It's a little bit of a mixed bag, but Lando just wants to fight fair. He wants to beat them on the track, but Oscar's proving that that might not necessarily be that easy. So I think you need to change your stance, Lando, and McLaren, you need to actually think about team orders. Then there's Lewis Hamilton. This performance was fine, I guess. I'm not just saying that because I predicted he would be fifth, but it was a step down from what we saw in practice. And that seems to be a trend this year, regardless of where the W15 is in terms of development. Lewis Hamilton finds something in practice, yet he can't quite do it in qualifying. And sure, the W15 wasn't expected to be good because of the really high high temperatures and the brand new asphalt not really playing well with the new car. But it just completely fell flat in qualifying, and his language really didn't help. I bet he was really expecting to do well here to prove to the Tifosi that he was a justifiable replacement for Carlos Sainz. But then he goes and does what he does in qualifying, and then he goes, I'm not good enough. I get that he's being honest here. The Tifosi will remember this, they will be listening, and they won't be brimming with confidence that their new man, their new leader, their new big hiring, who's hoping to get a championship with them. Yes, I get it, it's the synergy that he has with the Mercedes car, but the language, the Italians, they'll remember it. And the car itself just didn't have the pace either in the traffic, and even though Carlos wasn't much cop compared to Charles, he was still ahead of the Mercedes, and it sums up a very lackluster race for the team after expecting such a poetic start to their rookie's career, but I'll get to that momentarily. Now, I would have put Kevin Magnussen in the winners section for this next bit, since Nico had such a mardy of a race, and it's so rare to see the Dane get the upper hand this year. But this all came at a cost of 2 penalty points, and we were all expecting this to happen. He's now got an automatic race ban. Now, it's important to remember here, the clash that he had with Pierre Gasly, I mean, it wasn't really a clash, it was a coming together or just a situation where it got tight. That got some penalty points. That didn't trigger a ban specifically. It was just a totaling up of the 12 penalty points over the course of the year. But it does mean the FIA's activated their trap card, so he's got a race ban, so he won't be in Baku next time out. I mean, okay, it's good that Haas got a point, but it's not quite so good for the fact that Williams got 2 points. And yeah, sure, Williams isn't contesting with Haas at the moment, but if the Williams upgrade works and the Haas just can't get any more upgrades, they run out of puff for this year, then it's going to get a little bit dicey come around Abu Dhabi Vegas time. But hey, I will consider this a so-so race for Kevin because, yeah, sure, he's not going to be racing next time out, but at least he was able to do better than his teammate, and this teammate's been running rings around him for the better part of 18 months or so. So this is a teensy tiny victory, but not enough to be on the winners list, unfortunately, because, you know, the outcome, that's not good. But this does beg the question about who might be substituting for him in Baku. Might they bring in Oliver Behrman, considering how dominant he was in F2 last year with Prema? Or might they not want to do that because he might not be eligible for FP1 sessions anymore? They really have a rich program with him in that, so they might not want to. Maybe they might drag out Pietro Fittipaldi once more, saying, here's what you could have won, Pietro. You want to try F1? Well, you're not going to get a full-time seat, mate. So, yeah, I think he might rather just spend his time in another category. Then we get to the losers, and you know what? I can't call Kimi Antonelli a loser here. I would say that he's in an unfortunate category. Look, the amount of pressure on his shoulders is so vast, and even though I feel quite smug that I was right in thinking that Mercedes would wheel him out for FP1 at Monza because, you know, he's 18, he's Italian, he's now been confirmed to be partnering George Russell next year. But the fact is, though, Kimi was expected to perform, so okay, if he'd gone out in the car and just gotten in some long runs on high fuel or something like that, doing the busy work while George was doing like medium or soft tyre runs, then Kimi might have been like 18th, 19th, 20th. People might have gone, oh, he's really bad, like Fred Vesti got. He got the short string in Mexico. He was doing all the high fuel runs and stuff. So I think Kimi just wanted to go out there and shut people up. He's got balls, that kid. He owned his mistake. He's got a pretty mature head on his shoulders, and especially considering that his namesake was in the Sauber garage that weekend. And yes, of course, he wound up in the wall, and Behrman didn't crash his car when he was doing practice, and nor did Doohan. But because of what his boss was laying down, and laying down thick toward us all, I'm going to be reserving judgment until we see him in next year's car. Simple as. Then we've got James Vowles. This man's downfall in terms of fan goodwill should be studied. It's been a really rough year for him in terms of public relations, considering how last year was so good, bringing Williams some hope. And even though I understand that his long-term end goals for the team will benefit and prosper the team going forward, they've gotten a really good lineup for 2025. Franco Colapinto seems to be doing okay, replacing Logan Sargent. This man just needs to know when to stop talking, because the whole thing about dating and Carlos, that's getting old and a little bit creepy at this point. And the whole thing regarding Logan, that was just getting unnecessarily long and extensive and long-winded. And now what he said about Mick Schumacher, which didn't need to be said because he already made his choice with Franco, calling him not special. Yeah, I understand the context ultimately when he did elaborate, saying he's not like an Ayrton Senna sort of special. Okay, I get that. I understand that. But he was just very sloppy with his words, to the point where Mick Schumacher's mum went to Monza and gave James a talking to outside of the Monza circuit. That, no. After what Corinna Schumacher has been through, no. No, 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 no. Bad, James. You do not do that. Not after what she's had to go through with Michael, Mick, keeping their family together and away from the media. She's done a masterclass in keeping that family private. Considering that Mick was busy in Kota and wound up actually carrying his Alpine squad considerably. Now, I consider that a very constructive way of venting his anger and not getting sad about it. But at least James apologised for it. But the thing is, though, he just needs to be careful and just think about what he's saying. Because now he's got even less goodwill with the team. Williams have probably lost a lot of fans because they dropped Logan. And yeah, sure, they'll gain quite a few in terms of getting Carlos Sainz. They'll probably get Santander as a sponsor or something. They've gained a lot of sponsors from Franco Colapinto as well. But the fact is, though, this man, wow. He's just dropping the ball considerably. Because again, he didn't need to talk about Mick. He barely talked about Liam Lawson. In fact, I don't think he even talked about Liam, actually, in terms of not getting the seat. But either way, he should have just said, Franco got the seat. There you go. And yes, I understand. By this time next year, we'll probably have forgotten about this incident because Williams might have done better. They might have started to improve. Carlos and Alex will be doing well together. They'll be scoring points. This will be a distant memory. But right now, this is a really, really bad look. And speaking of bad looks, this weekend saw Red Bull completely fall to pieces. And supposedly, Christian and Helmut were arguing in the garage according to Turkish media, and Max himself wasn't happy, him stating that his feedback wasn't being listened to, and that it's now resulted in the car he has now, whereas Checo is now going to the media, "See, I told you, there's something wrong with the car, so get off my back." I thought Hungary was bad. I think this is now the new worst weekend of the year, because there was no chance for a podium. Heck, there was no chance of a top 5. At least in the Hungaroring, Max finished in 5th. Here he finished 6th. He wasn't really able to do much. All he could do, really, was just have a little bit of an argy-bargy with Lando as he then breezed past him. It was just a really bad showing, and it just goes to show. In fact, Christian Horner has now said that the situation with the RB20 has become too complex. I bet you, in the next few weeks or so, they'll stop development on that car, they'll just write off this year and try and figure out the problem for 2025. So that means they can finish this regulation cycle on a high, instead of just completely petering out with a whimper. The only crumb of comfort I can see for Verstappen is that McLaren's paralysis regarding Lando meant that what could have been a 17 or 18 point loss became just an 8-point loss. In fact, there seems to be a watchword for the moment for Max: damage limitation. That's what Red Bull are doing. They're sort of just capitulating, which seems a little bit odd, and it's, again, out of character for the team. And also, people are now starting to speculate, and I think there might be actually some truth to this. It's certainly food for thought here, that maybe Max was doing his part to make sure that Charles Leclerc won, and did his best to hold back Lando as much as he could. Well, I mean, as much as an RB20 can against an MCL38, because I think Max was asked this question outside of the British media circle, and he just went like... But it wouldn't really surprise me at all, because Charles and Max, they've been through it together, so I think he'd be happy for Charles getting his win at Monza, and they were really congratulating each other afterward. But also there's a strategic side of it, because Charles isn't in the title hunt at the moment, not as much as Lando, so it really wouldn't surprise me if Max was trying to do some 3D chess here, and thinking that if he can stop Norris's charge, he might be able to do some damage later on. Could this also be revenge for Lando using his patch race at Zandvoort or something? Something that Daniel Ricciardo said that Max wouldn't take lightly? Again, food for thought. Then there's George Russell. It's a shame, really. Third on the grid was very solid given that the car was expected to struggle this weekend, what with the asphalt and the air temperature, but that was all thrown away pretty much when George almost collected Oscar ahead of him. However, he did the best to avoid an accident at turn 1, and that's a really big achievement at Monza, so Oscar didn't get damaged, but George did end up damaging his front wing, so he had to come in for a new one, and the best that he could do was 7th place. He might have been in the hunt for maybe 4th, but that wasn't meant to be, unfortunately, but at least he was able to pass a Red Bull. He almost passed the second Red Bull, but again, he just ran out of time. But something that George mentioned is a really, really good point here, is that he got caught up in Oscar's dirty air, and therefore it meant that he ended up locking up, and then he just did what he did. So this is just really, really bad. We're only 3 generations into this regulation cycle, and the problems of 2020 has suddenly come back with a vengeance. It's just gotten really bad. This was meant to eliminate dirty air, these new rules, but now it's just back and worse than ever. Then there was Alpine. Yeah, it was a bad race with not much to go on, really, simple as. It was a letdown from the Dutch race, but Williams were the ones to score and they weren't, which didn't help. 8th place doesn't look so assured anymore. Williams might be able to get the slip on them if they keep on upgrading and they keep on cutting down weight, whereas the Alpine, the A524, it doesn't really seem clear exactly what they're going to be doing, or whether or not they're just giving up on this year and focusing on next year to get back where they're supposed to be, above 6th at least. Ocon and Gasly, they were trying different strategies. Oliver Oaks didn't seem too worried because they did the best they could, which I suppose is a much more team-boosting stance than had been previously. And I actually recall Ted meeting Otmar Safnauer in the garage, and Otmar being extremely happy that Bruno Faman, the guy who sacked him and replaced him, was gone, and saying that, very unfortunate. Oh, karma, eh? Then I've got to put Nico Hulkenberg here, because this was a really rough weekend for the guy. Very scrappy with both the Racing Ball drivers, and the one responsible for ending Yuki's race, ultimately, even though it was mostly down to him losing control and locking up, rather than him just slamming deliberately. And then his scrap with Daniel didn't help, because he then apparently went into anti-stall, he then just lost traction, he lost places, and then it was just completely all over. Kevin scoring and he didn't. It was just a bit of a scalp for him, really, and it was just unlucky. But then he got the penalty, he then had to go into damage. It was just a really, really rough race. Off the back of all the things at the Dutch Grand Prix, yeah, this has been a back-to-back session that the team would rather forget. And then you've got to think Yuki. I mean, Saturday was bad when Daniel outqualified him, but Sunday was just unlucky. There's no real evidence to say that Yuki could have gained more places, though. But the chance to at least try was denied by Nico. And in a season where DNFs are relatively rare, for Yuki to DNF, oh, that's really, really bad, and that's just unfortunate. Again, this is more unlucky than incompetence, but yeah, Q1 Saturday, that's pretty iffy as well. But hey, it's not quite as bad as Stroll, because this was probably his worst race of the year. And why do you think that might be, Fernando? Ah, yes, of course, a little bit of the Palmer karma. Not only did he qualify 17th, whilst his teammate just missed out on Q3 and seemed quite chill with that, but then Lance wound up last on the road behind both Saubers. And then he got smoked by Oscar Piastri in the press conference after the race, saying that trying to pass Lance Stroll was like watching Lance in his first go-kart race or something. Oh! Someone said it! Oh! I mean, okay, yeah, I'm glazing for the fact that it was Oscar saying that, but still, that was a really low blow, Oscar. Whoa! I'm not going to get into the whole why is he in F1 shtick right now, because it's just been done to death. This is just pathetic. And okay, Lance can have his moments, but they're so inconsistent. My God, this was bad. Kind of like how the situation F2 has gotten a little bit, you know, a little bit bad and pathetic. This is supposedly meant to be the stepping stone toward F1. And to find out why I'm quite salty about this topic, you can go and watch my feelings in this video here right now. I shall see you there, and brace yourselves.